Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the first or joining us for the very first talk in the decision makers track at Leap 2.0. Now, part of this track is about helping you make better decisions as decision makers in terms of in the realm of API governance. And we thought, what better way to help you in that journey than telling you a little bit about or showcasing a little bit about what great looks like when you do have proper API governance, mature API governance in place. So with that, we have Justin here from Northwestern Mutual, who's going to be telling us a little bit about how Northwestern Mutual streamlined their developer experience through automated governance model with a whole range of different outcomes that they were able to achieve by virtue of doing so. Now, usually when you think about insurance, they are in the insurance space, which I'm sure Justin will talk a little bit more about. Usually you think about insurance, the first thing that comes to mind isn't usually the technical superiority, or so I thought until I met the team at Northwestern Mutual. I've had the privilege of working with Justin and his team at Northwestern Mutual because Tyke and Northwestern Mutual have been working together for a while now. And that thinking completely reversed during that journey. And as you will see, they have a strong, mature API platform that is driving really industry-leading outcomes. So with that, I'm not going to say any more. Hopefully, you're going to be enjoying this session. Thank you so much. Over to you, Justin. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Budha. So as you can see on screen, I'm here to talk about how we at Northwestern Mutual streamlined our developer experience by building on our own automated governance model, something that you might be interested in investing a lot of time and energy yourself after this talk and after this conference. So as we get into it, let me introduce myself. My name is Justin Russo. I'm a senior systems software engineer at Northwestern Mutual. I've been working there since 2018, and I've been very focused on our core platform systems. So things like hosting applications, hosting gateways, and all sorts of things that make our underlying business actually function. Northwestern Mutual, if you're not familiar with us, we are a life insurance company, but also we are a financial services company. And we've been around for over 160 years. And you might be thinking, well, like Budha alluded to, like, what do they do with technology? They just sell life insurance. Well, we've been using technology to enable our workloads for a long, long time now. We were one of the purchasers of one of the original commercially available IBM mainframe computers back in the 1960s. So some of our legacy code from those days may still be lurking around the corner. Sometimes you see dinosaurs walking through the halls of Northwestern Mutual, and that's awe-inspiring when you come across them. So we have been spending a lot of time building out our next generation of our business and using APIs to enable it. So I'm going to get into how we did that. I want to give a plug to one of my team members, Supreet Nagi, who was one of the people who originally put together this talk. And a lot of the content is very similar to what he did. So I'm very thankful to him for providing a great starting point for me to come talk to you all today. So here's a general overview of where we will be going through today. First, we'll be walking through the challenges and your expected outcomes for implementing some sort of automated governance model. Then we'll break down the fundamentals of what should go into it. We'll go through a series of personas that will be interacting with it. And then we'll be getting into the good stuff, which is what we actually built at Northwestern Mutual, albeit on a very high level, before I give a nice plug to the API gateway that we use to make it all happen. And we'll talk about a nice maturity model that you can use to build out your own governance model. So without further ado, let's get it going. So coming to the Leap 2.0 event, you might be in a similar shoes as the people on the screen here, being told that you must build APIs, you must write them. And if you have any sort of forward thinking into this process, you might be thinking, well, I can just build it. I can go install Express.js on my machine and write some REST APIs. But what happens 1 year down the line? What happens 5 years down the line? How do I make sure that the APIs I'm building today is still relevant then, and I'm not just ending up rebuilding it 4 times over? This is where API governance comes into play. If you're even a little bit further down your journey, you might have already been thinking about that. And when you think about what you have to deal with an API governance model, you might be thinking about standards, security, metrics, and that type of all the things that play into building your model. So it's okay if you're at the place where you don't even know how to spell an API, or if you are thinking about how you're actually going to push forward what you've already built with your model and make it a full-on automated process. I'll hopefully be covering enough bits there for you all to be thinking about your next steps wherever you may be starting. So API governance, you're going to be hearing that a lot. And I'll probably repeat it at least 5 more times during this talk. What are the main challenges for implementing such a model at your company? When Northwestern Mutual began thinking about it, we broke it down into 3 categories you see on the screen right now. Number 1, the sprawl of APIs within your organization, where they all are, where they're all deployed to. Do you know where they are? Do you know who's using them? Do you know what they're being built on, if they have security in place, who's using them, how much they're using them? To combat this, an idealized outcome and an outcome that we achieved is being able to automate the registration of every single API within Northwestern Mutual, within an API registry or an API catalog. And then having discovery and endorsements in place to ensure that people can find them and they know that they are good. Next, we made sure to implement automated insights and trend analysis so that we can see what is being used and where it's being used. And we'll get into more about the technologies that we use to do that further into the presentation. And then finally, we worked out a way to automate retirements of these APIs so that when an API is no longer business relevant, we can strike it from the environment and start bringing all the consumers of it down so they can then move on to the next thing that will be even better for their business need. The second major challenge is ensuring compliance and consistency within your APIs. We want to make sure that any API that's being deployed today is meeting our standards and is being built in a consistent way so that people, when they're interacting with different APIs from different parts of the company, can ensure that they know what to expect and they don't have to relearn an entire domain every single time that they shift that context. So to do this, we wanted to introduce a concept of governance by default, which I'll be evaluating, I'll talk a little bit more in a bit. We wanted to ensure that there was 0% high security vulnerabilities, which is pushed forward by having good engineering practices in place and standardization of those practices. And then finally, we want to make sure that the business relevance is embedded into each of the APIs that we are deploying out today and building today. Meaning that if we are building something, there is a purpose for it within our business, and we are not just doing it to meet a slightly little niche of our business. And then lastly, and most importantly for many of you, is the developer experience. If what you are building with your API governance model is making your developers' lives 10 times harder, or even 2 times harder, you're going to find that people will not want to align to your governance model. So you need to achieve practices that will make it even easier for them to meet your governance model where it is and be able to build upon it. So we do this through a process we call the integrated tech stack. And this has allowed our engineers to save about 40 hours every single day. Well, not every single day. That'd be amazing. You get time back. 40 hours per application that they need to set up is saved because of the automations we have in place. Additionally, when interacting with the model, we make sure that when there is failures in it, developers know about it as soon as possible, so that they get notified and then they can take corrective action and they don't have to wait until they're going to production with it to find out that there is an issue. And then lastly, you need to make sure that there's a high adoption rate for this. People know about it, people use it. We've been able to achieve an 80% adoption rate within our own organization. So enough on the challenges and outcomes. What goes into an API governance model? We like to see it as 3 specific categories. 1, API management. You need a good centralized API management column to your governance model to make sure that there are good management practices in place to allow people to stand up APIs, retire APIs, and maintain them throughout their life cycle. This can take the form of having good tools to design and publish and document and secure those APIs, and additionally, being able to move on from them afterwards. The second core thing is having a domain design in place within your models. So within Northwestern Mutual, we refer to this as a business domain driven architecture, or BDDA, but you might know it more commonly as a domain driven design, or DDD. That is a very common practice that there's some good texts about it out there. We made sure to try to model every single bit of our domains of our business, so that what we are building can align to the domains and make sure that it has good business relevance, so that we are building something that can be aligned and be reused. And then lastly, we have a maturity model. The ideal thing, the maturity model represents several stages along the journey that can be achieved as the APIs you build go from inception all the way to the initial deployments, all the way up to production, and then beyond version 2, version 3, version 4. A constant reevaluation of what is good, what your organization lists as good or great for when you are building your APIs. All these together, when you combine them, will allow you to build something we call the governance as default. It means that from the get-go, you have an API that can be stood up quickly, can align to what your business needs, and has a path to a place where it is relevant and continues to be a core pillar of what you want to build, and people will want to use it. So when it comes to who needs to interact with your API ecosystem, I have 4 different core personas that will need to interact with it. And when you're building out the systems in play, you should keep these in mind. First of which is the API developer. I'm assuming many of you here today are people who are building APIs or need to build APIs. And this type of person typically wants to be able to build them faster, make them compliant to what they want. They want analytics around them, and then they want to get rid of them in a seamless way when they're done. And the best way to accomplish this is by building an integrated tech stack, which I'll elaborate on a little bit about what I mean more specifically, and some sort of idealized continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines to deploy them. Second, we have an API consumer, someone who needs to find your API and integrate with it to be able to pull the business value out of the hard work you've done building the API in the first place. Ideally, this person will have some sort of API registry that is cataloging and all the APIs within your company, and being able to utilize some sort of access control systems with authentication and authorization processes, so that they don't have to maintain their own version of the API, but instead can connect to yours from any number of places securely and compliantly. The third is an API governance inspector, someone who is interested in looking through what your APIs are doing and making sure that they are meeting the standards that are in place within your company. So this person is interested in reporting primarily, looking at trends, looking at who's doing what and how they're doing it, and then who isn't doing it and who has gotten specific exceptions away from it. This type of person needs processes in place that will make sure that when they are looking for data on this, all of the APIs are being auto-discovered and auto-registered in some sort of API registry. And that within that registry, the standards are endorsed, implemented, and reported. I see a number of questions. I can jump back to them at the end of my presentation. So the last persona is someone like myself who is managing an API management, the API management area, someone who needs the ability to have and maintain a complete life cycle of APIs within their system. So they want good infrastructure that works for what they need to do and allows everything that goes into deploying and maintaining APIs pulled away so that the people who are building them can focus on building them and none of the other infrastructure parts of it. So this type of person is looking for a good API gateway. They're looking for a good registry. They want a good enforcement point, which can happen maybe at the gateway, and they want good reporting and governance to help them make informed decisions about what they're doing within the API management area. So we finally get to the good bit, which is a general process diagram of what we built at Northwestern Mutual to realize all of the bits that I've been talking about up until this point. So within this model, you can see that there's 3 key areas and 3 key consumers. We have the creation and deployment of an API. We have notifications and endorsements of those APIs. And finally, we have reporting on those APIs. And within those, we have our main stakeholders, people who are developers who are building those APIs. We have our domain architects, which are people who are evaluating those APIs and making sure that they meet the standards. And then we have our inspectors who are looking at the overall picture of APIs within the model and be able to inspect and understand what's going on with APIs in the area. So starting from the developer's point of view, the developer uses what we like to call an integrated tech stack, which is basically a developer toolkit with a bunch of predetermined recipes for different types of application creation patterns within our accepted standards for what an application is. So the most easy example of this is we build many APIs using Node.js in a Dockerized container that's deployed to Kubernetes. So our integrated tech stack has a little button that says, I want to make a Node.js microservice, and this is its name. And then from there, there's a little ability to classify that within a business domain. I'm concerned about clients' data. So I'm going to build a client API that exposes information about X, Y, and Z thing for that client. And from there, it's a quick 1-button push, and it pushes that new code based off of our templating with all the compliance and security built in to a repository, which will trigger CI/CD pipelines that will get it into the environment so that they can immediately start seeing that their API is working and that they can interact with it and build upon it very iteratively. So how this actually, once that API hits the live environment, we then meet the governance pieces of this, which is ideally the deployments will then be vetted through those CI/CD pipelines, and they'll say whether or not it meets our endorsement standards, and when they try to go to production, they will be disallowed from going there. So how do they meet our expectations? How do they meet what we expect for the governance model? That brings us over to the notification and endorsement part. When an API gets deployed within our organization, it gets registered within our API gateway. And from there, we can pull out that API and auto-register it in our API registry catalog. When that happens, a notification gets sent to the domain architect, and they have the ability to go and review that, make sure it meets our standards for an API, and put a little check mark that says, this looks good to me. It meets what I would expect for this, and it meets our maturity level. And then the developer gets input there, gets feedback on that if they are good or if they aren't good. And when they go to production, they will then be able to move forward. And then finally, as soon as that API is registered and deployed to our environment, we are able to extract all sorts of data, metrics, analytics about its usage, and be able to pull that out and pull all sorts of good information into dashboards, and be able to understand when APIs stop being used, which ones are being used more, which ones are being used but shouldn't be being used, making sure they're compliant, and making sure that if there's big efforts like trying to adopt JWT as the main authentication model for the API, that we can track that and start pushing teams towards that direction. So overall, this is the whole picture again. You'll notice that in the center of this entire picture is Tyke. We love Tyke, and I'll be going into that into the next slide a little bit more. And we particularly use Tyke to export metrics into New Relic, though we are moving more towards using Dynatrace as a main metric store for us, as well as tracing and analytics. So this is the part where I talk about Tyke. You all are here because you at least know about Tyke. We love Tyke at Northwestern Mutual. We brought it in 2019, 2020 under their open source model, and recently upgraded to using their full enterprise offering. It is a highly scalable, centralized API gateway. It works for us. It's very flexible. And through it, we can pull, at least with the system, we can pull all the API documentation and governance needs that we could possibly require from it. Second, it acts as a great policy enforcement point for coarse-grained and fine-grained entitlements. There's lots of great features in there that let you slim down what you need in terms of granting access to various APIs, and be able to kind of do that. There's even lots of great field-based things if you're into GraphQL, field-based enforcement and policies. It also provides the main security enforcement point, which lets you pivot to be using API keys, general OAuth, JWT. Great traffic management options like rate limiting, throttling, quotas, caching, circuit breakers, all built into the main gateway product. And then analytics and monitoring. Tyke recently now properly supports OpenTelemetry as a main tracing model that we integrate with Dynatrace within our organization. Looking forward to really using that to build our reporting in the future. They also have the very highly adaptable Tyke pump component, which takes Tyke's central metric store and lets you push it out to about a dozen plus different types of software for doing your reporting. So highly recommend Tyke. So when we did this talk the last time, we worked with Tyke to kind of build out a general maturity model design that you can use within your own organization to kind of weigh where you are at and start asking the questions that you need to ask to ensure that you are on the right path with your governance model. So there's going to be a link to this within the presentation. I think I just have to turn it on. And you can go and review that blog, print out this thing, this whole this table, and start asking your questions and saying, well, where do I need to go to next with this? There's one for just general platform engineers and developers. And then there's another one for platform managers and general decision makers. So I highly recommend working through this. Northwestern Mutual isn't even at level 4 with all of these. We're still on our way in some of these things. So there's lots of we're far along our way, but there's always more room to improve. So to wrap up, what you want to get out of an API governance model, an automated one, is the ability to create compliant APIs quickly with some sort of integrated technology stack. You want to have fast failure and notifications for those to ensure that your developers and your architects have the information that they need to be compliant within your model in a very quick time period. You want to be able to report out fast by having everything you need available at hand, compiled into dashboards, pulled into monthly reports, so that you know that with core data that you are on your way to achieving your governance goals. You want to be able to comply fast with endorsements, with all of the people that are managing your domains, being told where they're at with all the APIs in their area, and being able to assign where there needs to be improvement or where it's good already. And then lastly, you need definitely to enforce these within your company via early and often non-compliance warnings, and then full-on blockers and guardrails to ensure that your engineers are building things that will work for you going into the future. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening to my rambling for the last 25 minutes. Hopefully you learned something. There's some good conversation going on, some questions being asked. So I very much appreciate you all taking your time in the morning. I will be around if you want to chat a little bit. I know I didn't really get a chance to answer any questions. And obviously you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you would like to chat more about APIs and what we do at Northwestern Mutual. So thank you so much.
Justin. We kind of have a couple of questions, possibly 2 minutes for a question.
Okay.
I think there is one ongoing thread around API registry. I think you might have touched upon that already, so I'm just going to leave that for a moment. There is a question in the Q&A section that Paul asks, which is about, does Northwestern Mutual have a spec-first design policy, and was there any resistance when it came to adoption of that? So do you have a spec-first design policy at this point?
At this point, there's no enforcement on it. There's a general idea that we are going to be shifting this way soon. We're moving towards building out tooling that will really incentivize this. We'll be able to say, hey, you should be thinking about the design of your API first. It has to fit within this domain category as it is. So you have to know, at least at the top level, what you're building and the form of it based off of what we've defined from domain to domain. And from there, it should follow certain conventions into what you need to build. There is resistance. People don't like writing documentation. They don't like designing things. Engineers on my own team enjoy just building first and then working out the compliance later. And I'll tell you right now, it is far easier to sit down and think through it instead of going back and trying to be like, well, oh, I didn't think about this. I didn't even approach this. Oh, I didn't address this type of error state within the API. So you kind of just need to start doing it, and having some sort of enforcement policy in place is going to probably help push people into that place where they are doing it first.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I see a couple of questions around sort of how the business domains and things like that from model. I feel like that's a much longer conversation. So I would encourage you to perhaps have a conversation with Justin on chat, or maybe connect with him on LinkedIn as well. And if you want to throw any further questions to us as well, happy to do that. The maturity model was something that we created to, again, help people understand where they land in their maturity journey, and to hopefully help them accelerate or mature across the spectrum in a very targeted and resource efficient way. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, I managed to help create that a little bit. So, if you need help with it, I'm happy to help you take you through that journey as well. So appreciate your time, Justin. This has been a fantastic session. This is absolutely what we expected out of these industry case studies. I hope the attendees also found it really, really valuable. By the reaction so far, it seems to be very positive. So appreciate it, Justin. Thank you so